You know, every time Chris Chibnall has done a New Year's special, I have been surprised at how much I liked it. And I am at this point genuinely trying to figure out, is it because I'm still getting over being drunk from New Year's Eve? Is it because the finales of all of his series have been so much of a letdown and anything would be a step up? Or is he genuinely entertaining me? Don't know if I have an answer for that, but let's talk about the latest one anyways. Eve of the Daleks. And yeah, I kind of gave it away, or at least part of where I'm going with this, in the cold open. I enjoyed this. It shouldn't surprise me at this point. I enjoyed Resolution. I enjoyed Revolution of the Daleks. Not without reservations, as is the case here as well. And I suspect that both of those are not going to feel as good on a rewatch. But on initial viewing, I enjoyed most of what was going on in both of them. And I enjoyed most of what's going on here. And I think I enjoy it more than either of those two. I kind of feel like the specials bring out the best in him. And maybe it's because so far, with his writing, when he's written standalones, they feel like filler. And not just because they don't contribute to some sort of greater story. Series 11 didn't really have one of those at all. But they don't even feel like they're moving the characters forward in any significant way. And then when he does try and do overarching stories, it has not worked for me at all. But there's something about him doing the New Year specials where it's like, yes, it's a self-contained story, but it's also going to be bigger. It's going to matter because it's a special and it's longer. And so it's like he taps into that enthusiasm that he has for the bigger stories without having the space to actually do the stuff that he does with like the overarching plots that tend to tick me off. But it doesn't feel as throwaway as his standalone stuff. It actually finds a decent balance pretty consistently. And again, yeah, I enjoy this. So there's a number of things that I like about this. Like right off the bat, something happened that I was like, oh, for God's sake. And then it amended my issues almost immediately. Because when the first time Nick died, spoilers, I guess I'm going to talk about this pretty openly. I enjoyed it, got some reservations, can't even really talk about those without getting into spoilers. So there you go. So the first time Nick died, I remember going, oh, for God's sake. Chibnall, you did it again. You did it again, taking a minority character and killing them off pointlessly early in the friggin' thing. You did it 2 years ago with Resolution, with a gay character. You're like, and they're gay, and now they're dead. And so now you've done it with a person of color. Terrific. And then the time loop restarted. I was like, oh, okay, well, never mind then. I don't know if he meant to subvert himself on that, but he did a little bit on purpose or by accident. There's a number of things I like about this time loop. First of all, it is kind of nice that Doctor Who actually hasn't done time loops all that often. Very much at all, really. I mean, Heaven Sent was kind of a time loop, but also technically wasn't. That one's weird in a number of ways. And there have been times that time has gone back on itself, but an actual loop, you're just restarting the day. There's a number of things about the way this is done specifically that I really like. For starters, I actually kind of love the whole thing about the time loop gets shorter every cycle. So that it means they can't just Groundhog Day the thing and just they have infinite tries to get it right until they get it absolutely perfect. It still is able to give them stakes and something resembling a ticking clock, despite the fact that they know they are going to get sent back to the time loop and they're going to get more tries, but not an infinite number of tries. That was interesting. I also like that not only them, but also the Daleks remember what's going on loop to loop, so that it's not just a matter of fine-tuning this one thing until you get it right, but every time it's actually going to be slightly different because the Daleks are going to behave differently based off what they saw you do last time and what they think you're going to do this time. That was cool. I thought that was a really neat trick. And I think we actually get to know Nick and Sarah pretty decently, and they feel like more fleshed out characters than Chibnall supporting characters often do. That said, like, I called immediately. Nick's got a crush on her, and that's a very stale, honestly, in my personal opinion, kind of dynamic to set them up with, but it also didn't bog it down. The thing moves at a good enough pace that while I don't like that as a trope, this whole unrequited I've been pining at you forever and you haven't noticed me thing, especially when there's a guy pining after a girl, which, yeah, they acknowledge it's a little creepy, but then they also still do it anyways. But again, the thing moves quick enough and the thing resets often enough that didn't really drag the whole thing down that it might have in other circumstances. There's a fair number of specific moments and littler things that I like quite a bit as well. For example, I actually really love that in one loop, Nick destroys 2 Daleks by ducking when they fire at each other. Now, normally I would call BS on that, but since they've got the Daleks equipped with, like, the Gatling gun, it's going to fire a heck of a lot of shots before they realize what's happened. And just a loop before, when Daleks had been on either side of, I forget who it was, it might have been Sarah, and shot her, I remember thinking, boy, it's a good thing their aim was good that time, because yes, we do have a little bit of an instance of suddenly their aim is bad because the story demands the characters can't get shot in this moment. But I was like, good thing their aim was good, because otherwise they just would have blown each other up. And then the very next loop, that actually happened. I was like, hey, that wasn't just a random thing I noticed. Chibnall noticed too. Nice. So there's little things like that. I like Dan distracting the Dalek a lot for 2 reasons. I love Dan's attitude and, like, this kind of odd triumph he has when the Dalek realizes that Dan's just there to distract him, and Jin just goes, took you long enough, because that was the point. It took him a little while to figure it out. And plus, it also gave us this gem of a line, Daleks do not have managers. I don't know why. Like, it's kind of dumb. It's kind of a dumb line, but I honestly love it. Doctor's got a pretty good we're going to get this done speech. And part of it is because she's not saying we definitely got this next time. It's like, look, we're going to try, we're going to fail. We're going to try and fail, but we're going to get a little bit better every time until we win, which, while not as perfect or as eloquent as Peter Capaldi's response to the Master saying you're not going to win and just going, I know, and, like, winning isn't the point. Here, winning is the point, but it felt somewhat evocative about that. And honestly, I'd say it's probably her best speech-y moment since Haunting of Villa Diodati. And I also, honestly, I kind of love that the very next loop, that after she gave the big pep talk, very next loop, they get annihilated almost immediately. I like that they kind of undercut that, because yes, the sentiment she's talking about is going to get them through this, but just because she said a rousing speech doesn't suddenly mean that they win. They still got some stuff to deal with. I like that. And honestly, I just feel like the whole thing was a really good balance between being just complicated enough to be interesting, but also just simple enough to work as a fairly straightforward roller coaster ride of an episode. It was a good balance of those elements. I had a lot of fun with this. Does that mean I absolutely love it? It's perfect? No. Of course it doesn't. There's a number of things that made me go, There's little things like how long it took that Dalek to get through a door to a storage unit, which, I mean, the show did actually kind of lampshade that, and the Doctor had a very good put-down line of, congratulations, you have defeated an old door. So, like, that helped, but you still are kind of hanging a lampshade on something that was a little bit dumb. You know what line actually really bugged me? Less because of its specific use here, more because of what it implies. Dan telling the Doctor, you saved the whole universe last week, implying that at the end of Flux, everybody's saved. But, you know, the end of Flux didn't establish that. Like, we did not see, and they did not explicitly lay out that all the destruction that we saw wrought, that Bell was going through trying to find Vinder, all these destroyed planets, all these ruined systems, all these destroyed stars and everything, that was never shown to have been undone. So what do you mean she saved the entire universe? She saved what? A third of it at best. Can we get an acknowledgement of either that being the case or why it isn't one of those two, please? Don't move forward as if everything was fixed when you didn't actually do that. more of an issue with coming off the previous series than with this episode specifically, but it still annoyed me. I did not like that Sarah kind of had to talk the Doctor into saving Nick. Because actually, that was a very cool thing that Sarah realized, that because the time was shortening and Nick was the first one to die every time, that they didn't have until midnight to save Nick. That the loop that they were in, the next one was going to start after the point at which he had already died. So they needed to figure out how to get him to survive. Otherwise, he was going to be gone from this whole thing. That was a kind of a cool realization, but it sat really wrong with me that it was like Sarah had to talk the Doctor into rescuing Nick. Because it means one of two things. It either means that a normal human being who has never been in this situation before figured out a timey-wimey thing before the Doctor, and that I'm not going to say it's impossible, but they definitely didn't fully justify that, and I have a hard time believing it. However, the way the moment is played more strongly implies that the Doctor already realized this, but was going to ignore the problem and let Nick die. And I have a big problem with that. Especially given that this is the same Doctor who had this whole speech about how they had to save Percy Shelley and how important he was. The Doctor should feel that way about everybody. Nobody is disposable. And like, granted, I haven't done my rewatch yet for the 13th Doctor stuff, but this is something I'm going to be keeping an eye out on. There's something, like, just thinking back on it, it feels like she has allowed people to be more disposable than the Doctor ever should. And that moment, like, really landed badly for me. Thankfully, like, she did go with Sarah to try and figure it out. And, like, she wasn't like, we can't do anything and leave them behind. Like, she did try and help. But the fact that it implies that she wasn't going to, and that the episode doesn't have time to address why that's the case. Because you can do that with the Doctor. You can have moments like the 11th Doctor in The Girl Who Waited, making the decision to not take old Amy on board. But if you're going to do that, you have to grapple with it. Not just imply that the Doctor was going to leave somebody behind and then not address it. And this kind of does that. I feel like their re-entry into the TARDIS was pretty anticlimactic, because it felt like all of that build-up just to get it back to normal. I suppose the intention was that we were supposed to feel like, that we were losing the TARDIS and it was coming apart and crumbling over the course of Flux. The problem is that was such a tiny part of all of the stuff going on in Flux. Not to mention, they didn't even really properly tie that into that story. It just seemed to be a thing that was happening. So I suspect what the triumphant moment was supposed to be was, look, it's back the way we love it now, and it's no longer falling apart the way that we saw them grapple with, except, you know, that was never a major part of Flux. It was an aspect of it, but the characters barely had time to deal with the fact that the TARDIS was getting screwed up, much less the story or the audience having time to deal with it. So it doesn't feel like a triumphant moment. It feels like a big build-up to, yeah, we know that set. It's the same set we've seen already. I was kind of expecting it to be a redesign, which on the one hand wouldn't really make sense because Jodie Whittaker is not planning on staying on, nor is Chibnall, so it's probably going to get a redesign for the next Doctor. But that's just what it felt like they were building up to. And they don't do it. And finally, okay, so we got to talk about Yaz and the Doctor and Yaz's feelings for her. This feels like it's trying to pay off or bank on buildup that has not really been there. There's been speculation in the fandoms, definitely, that this was something that was going to happen. Some people even calling for it outright. I have my own mixed feelings about it, but that's because I have mixed feelings about the idea of the Doctor getting involved in romantic entanglements. Anyway, even if they are only one way and coming from the companion, it's just not something I love. But this feels like it's trying to be a culmination of something that had very little concrete foundation. Like, there were little bits that you could read, possibly, as Yaz having a crush on the Doctor, but this is like the first real solid confirmation, and we've only going to have a couple more episodes after this in which to deal with all that. That's... As a moment in and of itself, in terms of the interactions between Yaz and Dan, it's decently done. And I think I got some of Yaz's frustration, the way the Doctor felt like she was going to start to open up and then close down again. That's another part of the problem, though. This Doctor has been so inaccessible emotionally to her companions, and even for Yaz, who's been there the longest, that it also feels like, really? What is this crush based on? She does not open up to you. You do not know her very well. She hasn't let you know her very well. And yes, I know crushes can be superficial, not based off deep knowledge, but that's something that happens in reality, but it's not satisfying as a narrative. It's not satisfying as a story. So I don't think it's an inherently bad idea, my own distaste for romantic subplots aside. I don't know. This does not feel like it was developed to get to this point, even though the actual execution of this in and of itself is okay. It's just on a foundation that is flimsy and possibly non-existent. So that should probably balance out all my praise that I had earlier. But honestly, I had a lot of fun with this. I enjoyed the characters, the new and the old. I liked the dynamic of everybody involved. I liked the use of the Daleks. It was a little odd that it felt like the reveal of this was happening because of the TARDIS was held for as long as it was. It's like, is anybody surprised by that? I kind of assumed that was the case right from the get-go. But whatever, last nitpick, I think. But overall, I had fun with this. I consider this to be one of Chibnall's better episodes, as far as the ones that he's written by himself. So take that as a qualified compliment, which, whatever. But I didn't come away from this frustrated. I didn't come away from this annoyed. I didn't come away from this going, oh, for God's sake. And we get the Sea Devils next time. I've been waiting on a return for the Sea Devils. So I'm down for that. We'll see what we get. But yeah, there's issues. But I had fun. Eve of the Daleks. What'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Like, share, subscribe. Got the Patreon. That is how I pay my bills, and I'm able to keep this entire operation up and running. Rewards for every tier of support. There's also a link for that in the description, plus links for other stuff besides if you want to check me out on Twitter or Twitch or Instagram or what have you. Plus my P.O. Box address if you're feeling like you want to send me something. Hey, always happy to get stuff. But that is enough of me shilling for myself, because at the end of the day, my friends, you are the council. I just run the meetings. So until next time, this council is adjourned. None of this would have been possible without my supporters over on Patreon. In particular, I want to thank Robin Powell, Raven McBain, Tracy Scrabbit, Vincent Paul Bartolucci, Robin Moore, and Shayla Gourlay. If you'd like to hear me possibly mispronounce your name, maybe consider looking at the reward tiers over on the Patreon. But either way, don't worry about it too much. Take care of yourself.